Okay, red button means we are recording. Move or say something so I know it's recording. Okay. Okay. I'll be trimming this anyway. James, I'm glad you're willing to help me with this project.
Sure.
And since I'm relatively new to the church, I don't know the context of the church very well, though I'm beginning to learn as I interact with them. But since this is a project that is based on context of the church, I appreciate your wanting to help me understand some of the dynamics within the church.
Good.
One of the things that we are doing is the journey, and which is very much has to do with the context in the church being involved in telling this church's story, and are wanting to move into our future.
Right. With the journey, we're looking at not only what the story is currently here at the church, but also currently in the community around us. What is the story of our neighbors, and what is the backstory of Bethany, and how does that all play together in fulfilling God's mission?
So by backstory, you mean what their history is, their past is, and how it plays into what their present is, and how it may play into their future?
Correct. So we look at where we came from and what have we historically been doing very well and we're passionate about, and how does that play into going forward. It also includes the part of the backstory that, our past things that have not happened very well, and so we are able to set those aside and say, well, let's try doing this instead.
Okay. Has the congregation been excited about the process?
For the most part, yes. There's been some apprehension because we always have some that think this is something new, it's something different, and they don't know. So that fear of the unknown is one of the things that we're trying to eliminate. I think one of the things that's helped is the fact that we're not trying to come in and fix Bethany.
Right.
We're trying to take a good Bethany and make it a great Bethany.
Okay. Ooh, I like that. A good Bethany into a great Bethany. Instead of playing on what the problems have been, or the failures have been, or the mistakes have been, we're looking at what the good parts are of Bethany and how
Right.
they can help develop us, particularly in this day and age of a changing church.
Correct.
And most churches, and I haven't picked this up yet with Bethany, is they're very concerned about the direction that the church is going today. And I don't mean Bethany as a church or Disciples of Christ as a church, but I mean Christendom as a whole, how they are going, and that there's so many rapid changes. What is your sense of that with the church?
Well, there are a lot of rapid changes, and it's not only apprehension of the people in the pews, but it's apprehension of the pastor in the pulpit. How do you preach in a changed world? What are the things that how do you lead? What are the things that you guide them towards doing? How do you, when your Sunday school program doesn't work anymore, and you know that there needs to be some sort of Christian education of the people, some sort of discipleship, some sort of learning piece to your overall planning and organizing. So what do you do? Where do you go? And so there is a lot of apprehension. The world has changed. The context of that the church is in has changed. And we need to figure out how God wants us to still be church in that without hanging on to the way we've always done it.
which is a phrase we hear frequently,
Mhm.
which we heard that a lot at my last pastorate. But I see we're in a good spot here in the sense that we are multi-generational.
Yes, we are multi-generational, which helps us in one sense in that we have different views of what is needed for the church and how the church is to be. On the other side of that is that we as the leaders of the church have to keep in mind that your communication has to be in multiple different ways.
Mhm.
You know, I have people that want text, I have people that want an email, I have people that want a phone call, and I have people that they don't want any of that. They want it in a written form, like a newsletter or a document or a bulletin insert, something like that they can take home and read. So we have to communicate in a variety of ways to all these different people. So it's helpful to have multi-generational, but you have to keep in mind that that also entails certain things that you have to do differently than you would have in the past.
So I have to learn who likes to be texted. I have to learn who likes to be emailed. I have to learn who likes a phone call. Those who prefer a written document such as a bulletin or a bulletin insert or a calendar or a newsletter
Right.
or a face-to-face.
Correct.
And if my experience is on target, 50% of the time it doesn't work anyway. And you have to follow up with them again.
Right. Doesn't matter which form it is.
Speaking of communication within the church with the multi-generations, which I'm not used to working with, how is communication between the generations?
Sometimes it's good.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's troublesome. And what I've picked up on has a lot to do with how they listen to each other and what they are hearing from each other. Sometimes one generation will be speaking in a certain way, they'll be referring to certain things, and the other generation is completely lost. They don't know what they're talking about.
Now, would one of our regeneration, which is our young adults, would they understand what a vinyl record is?
Maybe. It's possible that these 20-year-olds might still get it. And the only reason I think they might know what a vinyl is because vinyls are popular again.
Are coming back?
Right. But when you talk about things like a time period before cell phones, they don't understand that. They don't understand how we even lived without a cell phone. They don't understand how we lived with a cell phone that only made phone calls.
I remember the days when you had a party line and you could pick up and listen to your neighbor gossip.
Right.
But that's another.
I don't remember those, but
I know, I'm over here. Communication. We seem to be also hearing about communication within the regional church and the general church.
yes.
And one of the things that our president and general minister has pointed out that she would like to see us go back to is our roots as a movement from the 1800s
Yes.
to Stone, Campbell, and Barton, and that we talk about being unified and that we're not our little individual cells here, here, and here, either in our cultural standard or our age group or the fact that we're very traditional or that we're very emergent, that as a church that we need to come together, and that there seems to be a disconnect to them when people think about unity. They think about everybody thinking the same and doing the same. And the message that we have got to try and get across is that we are all of one body, in the body of Christ. That's how we are unified, but we can still maintain our differences.
Correct. That is a with her book coming out and with the churches getting involved with looking at wholeness, looking at the unity that's there, looking at the identity statement, and how that pulls us all together, is really important, especially in this day and age. You know, the context has changed, and the assumption from the old days that, you know, we have different denominations, or we have different types of churches even within one denomination, and that can't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would try to get everybody on the same page in an agreement. Whereas now we need to be able to have that unity with diversity.
Right.
Diversified in ethnicity, diversified in the theological thinking, diversified in the version of the Bible that we use, diversified in whether we use drums and guitars and amplifiers, or we only have an organ. You know, diversified in all these different ways of being church and doing church, but still unified as the people of God.
So, if I'm understanding this, is that as a church, as a denomination, as a movement, totally, we have to be able to reflect the world. And the world is diverse. And in that diversity, we bring a lot to the table because we are unified through Christ.
Right. Well, think about it this way. Where you have come from before you came to Bethany wasn't reflecting diversity,
Right.
on many different levels.
Right.
They had become unified, but they'd also become very singular in demographic, in theology, in their way of doing church. You know, how you have to have a board, and you have to have all of these things in order to be a church. So they kind of narrowed down, and so that caused major difficulties in them continuing on.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a church that is looking to have that diversity within and maintain that diversity within, and is still maintaining the unity in Christ, then that church is more apt to bring in people from the context that we are in, the world that we live in. People will come because they see that diversity is okay. So I might not look exactly like that person, but diversity is okay because there's other people. They don't all look alike. They don't all talk alike. They don't all dress alike. They don't all pray the same way. So I'm okay. I can come to this church. But if they look at a church that's very narrow in who they are, they aren't necessarily going to feel comfortable. So a postmodern person is going to look at that. They look for that unity that has diversity built in.
When it comes to the congregation, we have a lot, and it's not just this church, but it's many churches, that we did not grow up disciple. And therefore they're not aware of who we are in our past, let alone the past of the church. And as I understand it, we are made of our past and our present in order to become our future. And that in that past and present, we have the choice of what we take with us, but it's who we are. Does our congregation, do you think they are knowledgeable of who we are as disciples?
I think that the older generations are.
Mhm.
They have either been around the disciples long enough to have heard it and learned about where we came from and know where we are. Many of the younger ones, even though they have been around for 10, 20 years, the disciples, they may not know exactly what the disciples came from or what makes us different than Episcopalians or Methodist or Baptist. So that then becomes the job of the pastor and the leaders of the church to continue to try and find ways to introduce and educate the younger ones or newer people to the disciples, and continue to lift up who we are and where we came from and what makes us who we are.
I just came back from a conference where there was a lot of younger people who are going to be our future leaders within the church. I came back very energized. But I heard from them, because some of them are not going to disciple seminaries, they're going to other types of seminaries, that they do not, if they knew what our history was, they are happy to be disciples for what Disciples offers them. And I think that's very exciting for something that we can be doing within this church, along with our mission, because I think they go hand in hand. And that's a place where I'm going to need to start learning the different groups within the church. And one of the things that I've observed, and you can let me know whether I'm on target with this, we seem to be a large group of people, but we have all these little pods in it. And sometimes these pods don't necessarily intersect or interact with one another.
Right. Sometimes the pods overlap, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they communicate well with each other, and sometimes they don't. And yes, that is a part of Bethany. It's pretty much a part of most of the churches, disciple churches that I've been involved in. There have been pods within. And that can be a good thing, but it can be a bad thing if it's let to go to the extreme, and where you don't try and get them at least interacting at some point. And when they all start separating and intentionally avoiding each other,
Right.
then you can begin to have problems. But as long as they are within their group, but then they have some periods of overlapping and they communicate with each other, then it should be all right.
I'm really interested in these kind of observations because, like we've discussed, that I come from a one-dimensional church, so to speak, and I have not had the ability to interact on several different levels. And that Bethany is more an example of what most churches are within, not even just this denomination, but mainline denominations, period.
Right.
We're cross-section. Unlike most mainline congregations, we don't have a doctrine, we don't have a creed, we don't tell people how to think, we just nurture them along in their faith development.
Correct.
So, after reading the things on the journey and having done some research for this particular competency that I'm doing, which includes communication, that there is a huge need for being able to listen to one another deeply and to make sure what we're hearing is what we're truly hearing and not just noise in an ear. I ran across a couple of articles which I shared with you as far as ethnography. And I got to thinking it's very similar to the journey in the story in that.
Yes.
and and has the congregation become very much a part of that future story. But it seems like it goes a step further in when you give the results that to the congregation, that they have a place in learning where they are, where they stand, where they think theologically, how they're alike, how they're different, how that works, how that doesn't work.
Yes.
And have you used how do you listen to your people, either as a group or as an individual?
One of the things that I've always tried to do was to focus on the questions that I ask in order to get them talking about themselves. And if you learn that art of asking the right questions, questions that force them to reflect and to share about something, and if you get the question to the point of where they're talking about their own life or their own self, then they begin to feel at ease, and they're able to share. And so sometimes you can get them going, and then all you have to do is listen to what they're saying. The trick is to also get them to listen to themselves.
Okay.
So you have to listen to what they're saying, think about what question you're going to ask that will get them to either continue on or get them to come to a point where they go, oh, yes, okay, I see. And then they begin to take on that and they begin to talk about it, and you've touched something within them to help them grow beyond whatever the situation is or the need that you're discussing or whatever the reason that brought you together to talk. And that can be for the group and it can be for an individual. So I always felt like it's really important to listen and then try and formulate the questions while I'm listening so that it helps draw them out and keep them talking.
Which means you cannot have any distractions.
True. When you are working with someone, especially when it's an important time with a group or an individual, you really need to have just put those distractions aside. You need to schedule it in so that you can make sure that everybody is together.
Storytelling is a big part of what we're learning, and you do very well in telling stories. Was the congregation comfortable with telling their stories?
I think they are.
Okay.
I started that when I got here.
Oh, okay.
One of the first things that I did when I was called to Bethany, within a month or so, there was the series of get-togethers. And we had it with about 5 or 6 people, so it was very intimate. We didn't have it here at the church, we had it at someone's house. And we would sign people up, and so it was every week for about 6 or 7 weeks. We got together with this little group, and I would tell them about myself and where my background is from, and I'd tell them that I'm a theological mutt and all of this background of different philosophies and thoughts in who I am, and then we would talk about, Susan would share about where she's coming from, and we would talk about who these people are. And so we would just go around the room talking about ourselves and getting them to tell their story of who they are, where they came from. And usually, I would ask them, to tell me their religious or theological background, And they might start with that, but they usually ended up going into what they really needed from the church. And that was really what was the intent.
Right.
You know,
Right.
what does each one of these need? And giving them time to get to know me. So with starting off telling my own story, and Susan sharing her story, it sort of got them telling theirs.
I was going to ask you if Susan was involved, but obviously she was. Okay.
Yes.
Good. With me being the associate here, I think the approach will be a little different. I was pleased last night when we had Bible study when they seemed excited about the workshop I'm having Sunday, which is on communication. One of the, I think, my goals that I would like to approach here is that if we can get some more intergenerational activity. Because I think that's going to be very important to our future story as a congregation, as a community of faith. And so some of the communication techniques, I really want to get into them, is this deep listening and stopping to listen and let somebody talk before they respond. And I think maybe part of that I might have them switch places and try to come, after they've learned what the other person or another group has talked about, to, and this may be down the road, to sit in somebody else's shoes and come
Yes.
from that aspect. And I've learned in the past that people aren't as far apart as they think they are. And I would like to see that come about. I think there's great potential. We've got a lot of good young people here.
Yes, we do. One of the things that we are learning through the journey is to try and find those ways to get the whole church together on something, and to try and see how we can work together within the generations. Instead of planning something for the young adults and something for the seniors and something for the youth, what can we do together as a church? One thing that we do well here at Bethany is our music program.
Right.
And so one of the things that we are looking to do beyond that is to take what we're doing well, the music program, and expand upon it with other arts. So we have a choir that has ages from the 80s all the way down to teenagers. And it's not a large choir, but it is a dedicated choir. There's about 20 people that are very dedicated to it, and it works really well. And then we provide music lessons for all of our young people. So we want to try and take that same kind of concept of working intergenerational and move it to the other arts, whether it be drawing, painting, drama, dance, writing, creative writing, whatever it may be. But
You're an
move
artist,
beyond.
correct?
Correct. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. And another intergenerational aspect is, we have 5 acres here of land, and so we're looking at the thought of doing a community garden. And one of the thoughts that came along with that, and it actually came from one of our teenagers, was to have some raised beds so that some of the older folk can participate too without having to bend over. And they can have a border around it where they can actually sit and work.
Oh, that's cool.
So, there are ways of being multi-generational, but we just have to discover what it is that we...
How Bethany does it.
Yes.
I know that, and it's not unusual from any church, where you have hit and miss who wants to be involved and those who stand on the side and go, have fun. And I know that has frustrated you. How, as a pastor, and I think you're not just alone in that situation, how do you, I don't want to say resolve it within your life, but how do you integrate it into your pastorate, knowing that it's something that may drive you nuts?
It's tough. And I think that one of the reasons it's tough for me is previous church had a lot less of that.
Right.
Where there were leaders that if you needed something, you would say, could you take care of this? And they would immediately go and get a group together and get it taken care of. Coming into here, and I was warned about this from the very beginning, that previous pastor specifically told me that she babied them and did everything for them. And so there is a difficult period that we're still in where trying to get people to take ownership, take charge, and lead forward on something without having to come back and find out what I want, or how I want it to look, or how I want it to be, or Pastor, what do you need, or how do you want it to look, and where do you want us to put this? So there is that part of it. The other part is to be very intentional on delegating. And when I delegate, to not just say, would you take care of the Easter egg hunt, but be specific with them. You're planning and organizing and getting your own group together to take care of the Easter egg hunt.
So you have to be very specific in what you desire.
Right. I don't have any preference. I want you to take care of it. And so I'm trying to delegate, but with them my blessing. And the reason that I try and do it this way is I go back to, in Ephesians it tells us that the church's job is to encourage and equip people. So leaders in the church are to encourage and equip others to do ministry.
Right.
And so I have, from the very beginning when I got here, have said, it's not my ministry, it's our ministry. And I continue to try and bring people to the table and educate them or equip them or help them know that they're already equipped.
Right.
Help them realize that they have a gift or a talent that they didn't. And that they can serve in this role and go forward. The trick with that is not so much with the young people, because they tend to latch on things and go. It tends to be with the older ones who think, oh, I've done all of this stuff and I can't do that anymore. So therefore, my ministry is to sit here and wave from the sidelines.
Yes.
And trying to get them to realize that God still can use them.
Oh yeah. I'm well aware of that.
Doesn't matter what the age is.
That's right.
God still can use you.
So what I'm going to take away from this is that in evaluating and bringing people together to work on projects, I have to be very aware of what their mindset is, what they think their ability is, their energy level, and essentially their interest also.
Yes.
Okay?
And how do we learn that?
By
asking questions and listening to their answers, and then getting them to talk about themselves.
right.
So it all comes back to this active listening.
And you can't do anything without listening. And I think that's where we've had breakdown in the church over the centuries, is that we may hear, but we may not listen, or we listen with a bias of what we think we're hearing.
Right.
And I think that is another big issue with interactions with people. We all can watch the same ball game, and all of us can come away with a whole different perspective of it, in the sense that I may say, they're rotten. They just didn't do all this week. And you're going, look how improved they were over last week. Perception.
Yes.
And
You find a lot of that on Sunday mornings.
in what
When
sense?
after the sermon, after the service, I go to the back and I'm standing there greeting people as they're leaving, and people will react to the sermon and talk to me on the way out, and they will have heard something that I know I didn't say, or I don't think I said that, but that's the way that they perceived it.
Right.
And that's what they needed to hear that day. And they're just happy as can be because, or they feel like something nudged them, and so I must have been speaking to them, and I wasn't speaking to anybody in specific. And so, that perception thing, they hear based on what's going on in their life that day and the day before, and before, on the drive over to the church. They hear the sermon based on the context of who they are and everything that's gone on. And so they will perceive something different.
When did you find in your ministry here that they became a little bit more open into, for lack of a better word, critiquing your message?
It was probably close to a year after being here. That first year is still the honeymoon.
Right.
And they were still, were walking not on eggshells, but walking softly, or, they didn't want to say anything bad about anything that I said or critique anything that I was doing. So after that first year, then they began to relax a little bit more. He's not going anywhere, this is going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I began to get a little bit more critique back on different things.
Because you or I, either one, cannot continue to function in a helpful, nurturing, spiritual education way unless we know how we are affecting them.
Right.
And if we don't get back feedback, even if we may not particularly like it, if we continue in that same vein, it's not helping anybody.
Right. Right.
Okay.
And part of it would be that I had to learn who I could ask.
Okay.
Even today, there will still be people that will walk out the door and they'll say, good sermon, and that's it. That's all I ever get from them. I don't know whether they're afraid to critique it or afraid to say at some point, but there are certain others that I can go to and they will bluntly tell me, okay, you went from preaching to meddling today. You gave me a lot to think about, and now I got to go home and deal with this.
Mm-hmm.
So, or I really didn't understand what you were saying. So I have to know who to go to and ask.
I find that somewhat amusing because it's what I did at Pulpit Supply here once, and I can't even remember what I was preaching on at the time, but apparently I had used an example of being in a board meeting. And somebody on the way out the door, now I almost think I know who it is after having interacted with the congregation some, is that you were almost meddling in our business.
Right.
And it's kind of nice to see that frankness, but I hope there will come a day that I can say, well, maybe it's a message we need to look at.
Right.
Is this something God is calling us to do? And of course, I just knew in school, and probably one of my first sermons, I was like, okay. But I'm at the point, I do have people go out and say, I really enjoyed your sermon, I like what you had to say, But I had, one of our professors suggested that what we do is not on Sunday morning, but say at a Wednesday evening Bible study, say, well, what did you think of the sermon on Sunday? Can you give me any feedback? What did you think it was about? Or just listen to them talk. And I've had some really strange things come out of what the point of my sermon was, which was not the point of my sermon.
Right.
Which is another form of communication. So we have to be really cognizant and aware of what we're saying up there, because while we are preaching the Word of God and hopefully we are speaking a truth, that we don't go off on a tangent someplace.
True. But, keeping aware of not going off on the tangent, not preaching as a reaction to something that happened at the church that week or that month, because you don't want people to think that you are pinpointing them or using them as the point of your sermon. You don't want them to feel like you're oppressing them or coming down on them or making them be seen in a different light.
And I have seen that happen.
Yes.
I have relatives who have said, that sermon was aimed at me because blah, 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 blah. And I'm going, well, maybe not, because it is a universal issue or it is a universal problem, and maybe you're just feeling sensitive about it. But do you watch the responses of the people sitting in the pew on Sunday morning?
I used to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't anymore. And the reason that I used to, the reason I don't is because when I used to, I would see a response and then I would start trying to think, well, why are they reacting that way? And what I had to come to realize was, you don't know what is going on with that person. So if they, make a face or something, it might not be what I just said that caused the reaction. It could be any number of things.
Could have had heartburn.
You could have had heartburn,
Yeah.
Or they could have had somebody say something to them when I wasn't looking.
Right.
So I don't know what their thing is. The other part was that the church where I was before had about 5 or 6 retired pastors in there. And so I had to learn to not look to them to make sure that what I was saying was right, because if they made a face or turned their head or did something, again, it could be a reaction to something else going on, or heartburn or whatever, and I was taking it as, oh, I just said the wrong thing. So I had to be very careful about who I look at. I do still look to certain places, and you learn that when you learn the congregation. You begin to learn where it's safe to look and where you don't look. And that's just a part of learning how to do that role of ministry, the preaching role.
I know that, Alan sits so far back you can't hardly see him.
Right.
And Brad, I have a tendency not to look at him. And I tend to watch you.
That's because I'm sitting up front.
Yes, but I'm learning that you smile a lot, so I could be saying something totally off base. You'd still be smiling. But, so what I'm gathering here is part of what my journey is in learning the congregation is to first get to know people one-on-one, to ask them about their story, to listen intently to their story, and while I'm doing that is to be formulating questions that will bring that out, maybe take them to a deeper level. this may not all occur in one sitting.
No.
And that as a pastor, I too have to be aware of how I'm communicating and the responses I'm getting there. And then it's the whole story of the congregation. I have a big job.
Yes. One of the things I found helpful, not only the meetings that I had at the beginning, was Susan and I started either going out to lunch after church on Sunday, or if we had a fellowship dinner, not sitting with the same people every time, trying to move around and talk at different occasions where during times of fellowship. And you may not get their whole story, but you get to know more of the people by those casual conversations than making an appointment with them and sitting down. And there's a few people that's how we became to know each other, really.
Mhm.
And once you do everything that you just said, then you can truly preach to this congregation. Then you know them, and you know what's going on in the life of the congregation. And so you can gear your sermon towards that.
And that's something I'm used to doing, knowing what's going on in the life of congregation, and I don't know that now. And so, not that I'm preaching generically, but because we stick to the lectionary, I try to do an exegesis that I think will fit most of the congregation. Now I lost my train of thought. And it will probably take me a year and a half before I really get comfortable in this. How long did it take people to start trusting you, to come to you with divulging some of their life with you?
Again, it depends on the generation.
Mm-hmm.
The older generation, by the authority of being the pastor, felt like it was okay pretty much from the very beginning. The younger generations, under 20s, teenagers, kids, they tend to just jump right in there telling you what's going on in their lives. It's that middle group that needs to be reassured. So some of them were right away, and some of them it was more about 6-8 months at least.
Okay. Sometimes it's like having a toddler that you're trying to encourage to be independent. That, yes, you can pour your milk on your cereal, but you need to do it with a pitcher. And to nurture them along in that sense. To build the esteem, build the self-confidence, so there may be more time and energy involved in the beginning to get them to be independent leaders than they are now.
Yes.
I thought I was done raising toddlers.
Now you got a whole church full.
That's right. I felt very welcomed here, so I am grateful for that, and you've certainly been more than gracious.
Encourage and equip, that's what we're supposed to do.
I read that someplace. Well, James, thank you for meeting with me today, and I've got a lot to think about and a lot to take off with me, so thank you. Let's see if that... I just hope the sound... Well, it's still recording, so thank God it didn't kick.